Our journey takes us to a park where people have lived for more than 9,000 years, just 75 miles outside of the nation's capital and home to the most popular road in the national park system. Let's explore Shenandoah National Park. I'm your host, Missy Rentz, and this is the Parks Podcast. Today, we'd like to welcome Carl Rand, an interpretive park ranger at Shenandoah National Park. Carl has been with the National Park Service since 2017, working at Yellowstone and Olympic National Parks before heading east. Since 2021, he's primarily led programs around the Big Meadow area of the park. Carl, welcome to the Parks Podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here.
Okay, Carl, so I'm going to start with some stats to kick this off. Shenandoah National Park is located on the western side of Virginia in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's the 22nd park in the National Park Service system. It was created on December 26th, 1935, when the President of the United States was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The park is 198,000 acres. Its highest elevation is 4,050 feet, which is Hawksbill Mountain. The lowest elevation is 550 feet. In 2022, there were 1,449,300 visitors in the park. It is one of the parks that utilized the Civilian Conservation Corps when it was created, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. There's more than 516 miles of hiking trails in the park. 101 of those is part of the Appalachian Trail. There are more than a dozen waterfalls, and while you're in the park, you could see black bear, coyote, skunk, raccoon, foxes, among other animals, and also 196 species of birds and 41 species of fish.
It is one of my favorite things is how diverse this area is.
It really is. And when it was created, Shenandoah National Park was only the second national park on the eastern part of the United States. The other was Acadia in Maine.
Correct. Yeah. So there was this big push really starting in the early to mid 1920s of bringing more big national parks out east. And Shenandoah, of course, was kind of one of the prominent ones in that. But predating that, in terms of big national parks, not including battlefields, monuments, what have you, it really was just Acadia in Maine.
And why was that so important to the state of Virginia as well as to the U.S. Park Service?
So back when they were starting this big push, the saying went was they wanted Eastern parks in Western tradition. Back in those days, if you were going to go to a park, largely in the early 1900s, you were going to be spending a lot of time and even more money, heading out several weeks out to the Western parks. But most of the people, millions of people were living over here on the Eastern seaboard. So it was important to bring that accessibility, to bring those national parks, that big wilderness, Western style landscape as they saw it in those days, to where the people were. So it was important, obviously, to the nation at the time because it was bringing the accessibility of the wilderness to the cities. But especially here in Virginia, and even still to this day with Shenandoah National Park, we are at best about an hour drive out of Washington, D.C. So we get visited by government officials fairly regularly. Being so close to the White House, being so close to headquarters for Department of Interior, a lot of other park landscapes look at us to kind of set a precedent because they know that we're so close to where it all began.
I've actually heard stories, and maybe it's folklore over the years, that there was a time when certain senators and congressmen would come out and do hikes to have conversation and negotiate, which I always thought was so fascinating. I don't know if it's true or not, but I've heard that rumor.
Well, and even we might be talking a little bit about this later on, but this landscape was so loved at the time that when Herbert Hoover became 31st president of the United States, he made his summer vacation home what he called the Brown House right here in Shenandoah. So it was a favorite stomping ground of his, and we've regularly been visited by presidents since and other officials ever since.
It is a great space.
Yeah.
So in the stats I mentioned about the Civilian Conservation Corps
Yeah.
and how they were part of the development of the park, can you explain a little bit about the Civilian Conservation Corps and why it was so important to the creation of the park?
So at this time, we had been a national park. We started in 1935, but there had already been a lot of human activity in this area. So due to human causes, cattle grazing, timbering, copper mining, stuff like that, along with natural causes such as the loss of the American chestnut tree back in the early 1900s, the landscape was drastically affected. The park that you see now, about 94% of the park is currently woodland, is all forest. But back in those days, there was going to be these big open areas of standing dead groves of trees. So when the Civilian Conservation Corps started in 1930, 33 under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, this was the very first national park to have Civilian Conservation Corps camps. In total, we had about 10 camps. At any given time, there was going to be 200 young men, or CCC boys, as we refer to them. And largely what they were going to be doing was quite literally rebuilding a lot of the landscape. They were installing hiking trails, constructing buildings, yes, putting in the infrastructure for the national park that was just about to open a few years later, but also they were planting thousands and thousands and thousands of trees. A lot of the forest that we now see to this day, I get comments often of how the trees don't seem as big as they should be. Well, that's because they're only, at this point, what, 70 to 80 years old, or they're the secondary growth from those CCC planted trees. So quite literally, a lot of our wilderness is thanks to the works and efforts of that CCC program.
And the CCC program was created in part to help during the Depression. Am I right on that?
So really the story began in 1929 when the stock market crashed. We went into the Great Depression. The next few years under President Hoover, a lot of the American public didn't think he did quite enough to help with the depression. So in comes FDR. He started rolling out his New Deal, which was full of these big work programs, largely to provide employment. When the CCC began, the entire intention, so you had to be a young man, physically fit, healthy family, unmarried, you're not attached. You can go spend 6 to 9 months out in, typically these were wilderness areas of, either national parks, national forests, state parks, and they were going to be doing hard, heavy labor. But for that effort, they were paid $30 a month, which at the time was the equivalent of about $550 a month, which not terrible during, especially during the Depression when people can't keep jobs. And for that, only five of those dollars went into their own pocket. The other $25 were mailed home to mom to help supplement
Yeah.
the economy back where they were coming from.
And in the creation, this park was not created without controversy.
Yes.
And I have to say, I appreciate how the National Park Service embraces that history and we'll talk about it. And so there's certainly a lot about this on your website, but no federal dollars could be used to purchase the land. So the state of Virginia had to find ways to secure the money, and some questionable tactics were used during that time. Like many other parks, you had strong supporters and then you had strong opponents. But the history of the park, it's now so beloved. How did the park overcome that controversy of, in some ways, just taking people's land from them?
So the history, and not even just here at Shenandoah, but this occurred in various respects throughout all of Appalachia in terms of, as we view now, removal of people or displacement of people that lived here formerly. So when we, prior to us becoming a national park in the 30s, there was about 500 families of mountain community residents living up on what is now Shenandoah Mountain. And during those days, of course, we knew that a national park was going to be had. We already had resorts, privately owned resorts such as Skyline Resort, which still stands to this day in Shenandoah. So tourism was already in the area. But when we started looking towards this to become the national park, you're absolutely right. It was the Commonwealth of Virginia that was accumulating that land. In Many instances. So there was about 3,000, if my numbers are correct, there was about 3,000 tracts of land that were sort of piecemealed together to make what is now Shenandoah. But during that time, of course, the people that were living here, some were landowners. They had the deed, they had purchased the land, and they were, bought out. The Commonwealth of Virginia purchased that land from them. Many of them were provided housing, relocation housing, essentially down in many of the surrounding communities. Now, unfortunately, since there had been settlements, there had been European American livelihood up on the mountain really since the early 1740s and earlier is our earliest documented case of people living up here. That means that a lot of the people might not have officially owned the deed to their home or their land in the eyes of the state. A lot of them were largely tenant farmers. They lived up here on land that was owned by the cattle ranchers down in the valley. They were just here tending to the farms, tending to the cattle. So when that land was purchased off or claimed by the state, those people had no other option but to move. Now, the real controversy, of course, that's a difficult story in and of itself. The moving of people to make way for public land is a very, very controversial topic. But on top of that, where the major part of that controversy comes from is that back in those days leading up to us becoming a national park, is there was a private group of sociologists that came out under the banner of researching the people. They wanted to come out, them and a private teacher was working alongside them, and they wanted to live amongst the mountain residents, or as they called them, the hollow folk.
Mm.
And they were going to live alongside, get to know them, and really let the world know what these people were like. And this was not an isolated incident. That is the story for here at Shenandoah, but it's also the story all throughout, again, the Blue Ridge Mountains and Appalachia. And a lot of what these sociologists wrote about and published later on was kind of unfounded. They shared stories of uncivilized people. They were impoverished. They were uneducated. They didn't have church, didn't have markets, didn't have technology. And most of that was completely unfounded and completely
Mhm.
untrue, but it still sticks to this day. Kind of the stigma that we know, as you hear people talk about hillbillies, or again, even still hollow folk, stuff like that. That's where it all began. And that started to turn public perception at the time against the people that lived here and really made it, I don't want to say an easier transition, but it made it more accepted among the general populace of what was going on for these
Yeah.
public landscapes.
When you read about those stories and then how beloved the park is now
Yeah.
and how important it is to the region, it's just amazing the progress that has been made. And one of the elements that is in the park, and I say that with a question mark because I think it's a different unit in the Park Service, but is Skyline Drive.
Yeah.
And it is the most visited unit in the National Park Service. People come from all over to drive Skyline Drive, particularly in the fall, correct?
Absolutely.
Is it part of Shenandoah National Park?
It is, yeah. So the drive itself, it stretches 105 miles north to south, all along the length of the backbone of Shenandoah. Once it leaves the park in our South District, it turns into the Blue Ridge Highway.
Okay.
So it's kind of, but Skyline Drive is completely within Shenandoah. But yeah, you are absolutely right. It is busy any given day of the year. But if you were to come late September, early October, that is when we are at our absolute busiest because, of course, all of the leaves are starting to change and people are coming out to the mountaintop to be in the corridors of reds, oranges, and yellows, experiencing
So
all of that
beautiful.
fall foliage.
I was recently going from south to north, and I just didn't want to be on the highway anymore. And I
Yeah.
thought, oh, I'm just going to go hop into the park. And I probably went 20 miles before the next exit. And I was like, oh no, this is so busy. You can't efficiently get up to the north through the park, but it is really stunning.
Well, and one thing to, of course, to always keep in mind is it's going to be slower going anyways, even outside of the busyness, because speed limit in the park, max speed is 35 miles per hour due to the windiness, due to the wildlife. But even still, you wouldn't want to drive any faster than that, even if it was allowed, because
No,
there's so much to take in.
it is. It's really beautiful.
Yeah.
Another program I was reading about that you all have is an artist in residence
Yeah.
program. I love when art plays a role in different aspects of life. Can you tell me a little bit about the importance of art in the Shenandoah National Park?
So, art has been a staple of the National Park Service since its creation, stretching back to the very first national park, Yellowstone. But this artist in residence program is vital throughout the park system, and especially here at Shenandoah, because it is another way to tell our story. So, for example, just speaking here for Shenandoah, ever since the program began in, I want to say 2014, we bring in each year 5 different artists. They could be musicians, they could be painters. We had a quilter. We had one last year that was into paper making, and they use that. They give public programs and use their art to express the other side of Shenandoah. And again, I was talking about earlier, these parks were made to be accessible. Well, that art that is displayed and created here is just another way to bring that accessibility to the masses, both as they visit the park or even those that are visiting from home, that are visiting online. So it's an incredible way to share every aspect of the park, even if you're not able to get here.
And this isn't exclusive to Shenandoah National Park?
That is correct. I won't say every park unit, but pretty much all of the big ones and a lot of other ones have these artist in residence programs. And the artists will stay here typically for about a 4 to 6 week stint, I want to say. And they'll live on the premises and they'll have that time. They do have to give a handful of public programs. These could be art demonstrations or just conversations with the public about what they're doing. But otherwise, the rest of their time is spent creating the art that they're here for.
Oh, that's really amazing. Okay, so from my own experiences in the park, I think Shenandoah National Park is like summer camp. And I say that because
Yeah,
if there is any outdoor activity that you can think of, it can be done in this park.
absolutely.
Let's talk about if you're planning a trip to the park. It's a long park, north to south, and there's 4 main entry points, and to your point, you have a lot of 35-mile-an-hour roads. So, when I first go to a park and I open the app and I look at the map, I don't even know where to begin. How would you tell a visitor the best way to determine where to even enter the park?
So, first things first is to know, of course, where you're coming from. The thing is, all along Shenandoah, whether you're coming in from the western side through Shenandoah Valley or coming in off of the eastern side, there's always going to be local communities and towns at each of our entrance points. So, knowing what town you're passing through is a great way to begin starting to look at where you're entering at. Because you're absolutely right, Missy. We have 4 entrance points, but it's 105 miles north to south. The next thing I would say is don't always trust a GPS just by plugging in the visitor center, because we do have a lot of roadways that show up on GPS that are not actually roads. So on our website, which is nps.gov, this is the same website that any national park is going to have, /Shen, SHEN. One of the first links you're going to get to on that page has a list of all 4 addresses, all 4 GPS addresses for our entrance stations. That's what you want to plug in because that's going to get you to the right place.
Right? We'll link to the website for sure.
Yeah.
And then okay, so they get into the park, and I love it because the programs you have very structured programs and lodging. You can make a reservation for a room, or you can set up a horseback riding session, or you can go to exhibits or participate in ranger programs. Those things that there's a calendar on the website. But
Yeah.
then there's also a lot of other ways to play in the park, whether you're into backcountry experiences, hiking, camping, canoeing, everything. I mean, skiing, isn't there skiing somewhere in the park?
There is. So technically along Skyline Drive, if we stay open in the winter, but if we close for any reason, particularly due to ice or snow, I've seen people cross country skiing right along Skyline Drive when it's closed to traffic. So certainly.
That's so cool. So, how do you suggest visitors approach planning their visit?
Another great resource is going to be the website. It's going to have a drop down tab for pretty much any type of recreation you're looking for. If you want to know where to fly fish or how to get a permit, that's where you want to go. Backcountry camping, absolutely. It has a list of all of our hiking maps. However, when you get to the park, if you have an idea of what you like to do, but the website wasn't quite directing you exactly, or you get a little turned around, stopping in at either one of our two visitor centers. So if you're coming in from the north, we have our historic Dickey Ridge Visitor Center, which is just 5 miles into the park. Or if you're coming in further south in the park, the Bird Visitor Center, where I work out of at Big Meadows, is almost dead center in the park, mile marker 51. So that tends to be the busier of the two. A lot of people are passing in. And of course, we have 14 different trail guides for the entire length of the park, showing dozens and dozens of those 516 miles of hiking trail. We can help you plan out a backcountry trip. We can help you figure out where you're wanting to go to next. So definitely getting in, talking to a ranger, but of course, checking out the website beforehand, especially if you're planning a few months out and you want to get a jump start on it, that's the way to go.
And I think that one of the other unique things about this park is that you could go for a couple hours, you
Mhm.
could go for a week. There's so much that can be done that it can serve whatever purpose you have and whatever desire you have.
Oh, absolutely. And there's so much to do surrounding the park as well. We're within a few short miles of a lot of big cities. So we do get a lot of that kind of, what you might refer to as a weekend warrior, just coming out, doing a day hike or a simple backpacking trip for the weekend. Or you get people that stay here 2 weeks long and they're wanting to see and do everything.
Mhm. I need to come back to the park. I never came to Shenandoah thinking about the animals. And so I've done hikes, I've gone for the foliage, I've gone for the overlooks and the views at the top, but I have never paid attention to the animals, and I need to.
I forget exactly what our stats for mammals are, but I mean, countless animals, and they're all active at different times of year. Right now, all of the babies are out, so a lot of fawns are out and active, being born in early June. The bear cubs are out and active. Right now, maybe to the chagrin of a lot of hikers, but the rattlesnakes are still in their breeding season. So a lot of snake
Wow.
activity out and about. And I love reptiles, so I love being able to see them from a safe distance.
Right, of course.
But yeah, a lot of people, this is a really popular park for birding. You mentioned just shy of 200 species. It's a very, very popular place for songbirds.
I was just talking about to someone about birding and how I need to come do, like, a ranger program at one of the parks because,
Yeah.
and I think it's particularly as people get a little bit older, there's a greater appreciation for it, but
hmm
I always love it when I'm with someone who can, like, hear a bird and know exactly what it is.
Oh my gosh, yeah, and that's the thing. I've never been too keen on knowing birds by sight or sound, but being out here, I've had to learn a lot of them, and there are some wild calls. If you ever get a chance, if you're out on a hiking trail and you hear what sounds almost like a miniature robot up in the trees,
Uh-huh.
that's one of my favorite birds here. It's called a veery, and they actually have a two-toned call that they give so they can kind of harmonize with themselves, and it's really bizarre sounding.
That's awesome. I'm so excited. I mean, I've spent so much time in the park in my life, but every time I talk to someone, I'm like, yeah, there's more I need to go do. I need to go back.
One big thing here is that anytime you come, obviously fall is going to be our big draw, but a question I get asked a lot is when is the best month? When is the best week? When is the best day to be out here? And it's an impossible question to answer because if you come here in springtime, April, May, not only are the waterfalls coming back to life, but you have the big bloom of all of our spring wildflowers. Come here in June and July, that's when the wildlife is so active, either in their mating season or their calving season, when all the babies are active. You come here in August and Well, now I'm trying to think of what's good about August. Usually you get some other, oh, that's when the goldenrod's in bloom. So another kind of a spring back to the wildflowers for their grand finale. And then, we never close our gates. The only reason Skyline Drive will close its doors is if there is a really severe ice or snowstorm over winter time. But as you said, you can come here for winter activities. You can come here and hike carefully if it's icy, but it's a completely different park in winter time. Seeing the ice growths on the trees, seeing the deer still out and active in the snow, and even the songbirds that are here in winter being active. And it's just, there's a very different solitude, fewer people, but with just the quiet on the mountain is completely astounding. There is no bad time of year to come here.
And I always try to go to the website and at least be aware of what my options are, but
Yeah.
then the rangers have never steered me wrong on something. So even as you're entering the park, you can ask someone what's good to do. They're really a wealth of knowledge and can often guide on if a trail's going to be muddy that you don't want to go on and things like that. So I think it's really important to make that your first stop.
And also, when you come in the entrance stations, as long as there's a ranger on staff, they'll hand out a bulletin which gives a little bit more info to help you plan your trip as you enter the park. But then it'll also list all of those ranger programs that you were talking about. And we have, since last summer especially, we were on a few-year hiatus, as many other parks were since 2020, but we really came back in full force with our ranger program. So historic hikes, nature walks, stationary kids programs, anything you could dream of, we have it.
You guys have a night sky weekend, right?
We do, yeah, that's happening
Coming up.
this year. It always happens in August. We plan it typically around the Pleiades, a meteor shower. So this year it's going to be August 11th through 12th primarily. And we'll
And
bring in guest speakers.
you're not a dark sky park, but you have this program. There's a difference, correct?
Yes. So not officially. In order to earn the certification of dark sky park, there's a lot of precautionary measures that the parks have to do. So they need certain hooded outdoor lamp structures so that all of the outdoor lighting is directed down. They have to be within a certain distance of settlements and towns. We don't get all of that light pollution. But despite the fact that we are not a night sky park officially or dark sky park officially, we do have these what we call our star parties. So our dark sky programs with night sky rangers. We have our night sky festival annually in August. And that's just because despite all of the surrounding civilization around us, we have some of the darkest skies throughout the Blue Ridge just because the geology of the mountain provides a lot of barrier against that light pollution. So you can see the Milky Way on most clear nights.
Oh gosh, that's impressive. So you are a wealth of knowledge on the entire park, but as I mentioned, you predominantly right now are working in and around Big Meadows. So can you tell us a little bit about that area of the park?
So Big Meadows, it's not a bad view from the office, if I do say so
No,
myself.
not
So
at all.
to paint the picture, and I know you've been up here, but what I'm looking out at is about a 135-acre wetland meadow. So not just singular grasses that we might picture with the grasslands of the Midwest, but this is going to be roughly 200 species of plants out there, from the different grasses and sedges to the mosses and lichens to the standing oak trees and flowering plants. Right now, there's a lot of flowers out in the meadow still hanging on from late spring. But the fascinating thing, what I love talking about with the meadow, is how much it's changed. And again, that largely ties back to the early use of the land and the CCC, because when we became a national park in 1935, the meadow was over 1,000 acres large. It was much, much bigger than what it is now. But due to the protection of the landscape and the replanting of a lot of forests from the CCC, the forest has reclaimed a lot of it, and now we're down to just about 135 acres.
Still beautiful. Unlike a lot of parks, Shenandoah National Park is dog friendly, which is huge for me as a dog lover and a dog
Yes.
owner. You have lodging, you allow them on most trails. and a lot of the activities allow dogs. What rules do people need to be aware of when they bring their dog to Shenandoah National Park?
That's a great question. And dog owners are always wanting to do the right thing, and we have very respectable dogs and dog owners alike in the park. So again, of our hiking trails, there's over 500. Of those 500, there's only about 20 miles in total that are not dog friendly. So 9 individual trails. These are going to be limited to dogs, either because of completely inaccessible, it requires scrambling, it's hard, sharp rock, which will not be friendly on paws, or it's going to be really narrow, really popular trails. And so we limit that activity because with hundreds of people hiking it a day, plus dogs, it gets a little too congested. Now, on top of that, so once you know what trails are going to work for you, dogs here in the park do need to be on a leash, and they do need to be on a 6 foot leash. And not only is that for the safety of other visitors, but that's also for the safety of the dog as well. Because as you mentioned at the beginning, we have a lot of wildlife, and the wildlife here is absolutely wild. Our black bears in particular, while we've never had a true black bear attack that we know of on a visitor since we became a national park, dogs and bears are kind of natural enemies. So you always want to make sure you're keeping a nice close
Yeah.
hold of your dog and keeping a close eye on your dog as well, just in case the wildlife happens to be around the corner.
And where dogs are not allowed, as well as with other parks, it's really for the safety of your dog, as
Yes.
well as for the safety of the natural habitat. You don't want diseases brought in. You don't want a risk of injury. And that would be a terrible way to end a trip if something happened to your dog.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Does Shenandoah National Park have the Bark Ranger program?
We actually do not. So this is one, and I'm sure you've talked about it before, but yeah, a lot of national parks are getting that program up and running. Shenandoah does not.
Any other tips that you have for people when planning their trip?
One of the biggest things that I like to talk about, because I see hundreds and hundreds of people a day, and they could be one of those families that's coming from another national park and spending a full week here, or it could just be coming from a city for a day or two and doesn't have as much experience out in what we might consider one of these big adventure style parks, is that know what you're getting into. Be aware of the hiking, be aware of the activity, and be aware of your own capability and comfort level. Because the thing is, here, you mentioned in my introduction, I came from other parks out west, which are largely kind of big rock climbing, large distance hiking trails. I wasn't really sure what to expect coming out to one of these eastern national parks. And what I found is there are nice family friendly trails, but you really don't have to go too far to get 2,000 feet of elevation or end up on a 15-mile loop. We do have a lot of those big, big trails here. And regardless of what you're coming here and planning to do, make sure you know what the weather is going to be like. The weather can change very quickly on the mountain. Make sure you have extra water, more than you feel like you might need, and be aware that you are going to be up on top of a mountain after just driving up from the lower valley. There's about 4,000 feet of elevation difference between the high and the low. And even if you are accustomed to elevation, that can still hit people very differently, especially on a warm, humid day. And feeling lightheaded, feeling nauseous, feeling a little unnatural, let
Yeah.
people know and just be aware, always check in with yourself and see what your comfort level is.
That is really great advice. And on the waterfront, definitely bring your own because while
Yes.
there are water stations in visitor center, water fountains and things like that, they are pretty far apart. So
Mhm.
don't depend on filling your water bottle when you get there.
And don't drink from the river. No matter how clean our waters are, it is still wild, natural water.
Yes. So to wrap up, I like to give a speed round of
Sure,
questions. Just answer the first thing that comes to mind to these.
absolutely.
What is your earliest park memory?
So I grew up always visiting Yellowstone. It's a very special place to me. I had family. My uncle was actually a law enforcement ranger there. And I remember going, probably my earliest visit, I was maybe 5 or 6. We were spending Christmas there. And I remember riding in. So out of Yellowstone to access the interior of the park in winter, you have to take either a snowmobile or a snow coach, which is a big bus on massive, almost like tank treads. I rode in on a snowmobile riding behind Santa Claus himself.
Oh my gosh.
People won't believe me, but it was the real Santa. I know it in my heart. And he took me down to Old Faithful, where my uncle lived, where my family lived. And my aunt made us make homemade chocolate ice cream. Being a 5 or 6 year old, I was ecstatic until I found out it was just Hershey syrup dumped over churned snow.
Oh
I will
gosh.
never trust my aunt again.
What made you love the parks?
Not the chocolate ice cream, I'll tell you that much. So, that's a really good question. I don't know, I just kind of grew up with it. I always knew Uncle Les was he loved his career, the stories he shared were incredible. Watching my cousins grow up in and around the parks, they moved to several throughout their childhood. But I distinctly remember I went to school for wildlife biology. So zoology, field biology were my majors. And I went to school in Wichita, Kansas. And while I loved being down there, I loved the wildlife. I worked at the zoo down there. I loved working with the animals, teaching the public. Admittedly, I needed a little bit more topography in my life. And so when I wanted to kind of move away from the flatlands of the Midwest that I knew so well, I started thinking of Uncle Les and his park experience. And I was like, why don't I try applying? And out of sheer luck, my first job took me back to Yellowstone. And, the rest is history. I've been with the Park Service ever since and haven't really looked back.
And what do you like most about Shenandoah National Park?
Shenandoah National Park, I love, of course, I love the wildlife because that's my background. I get to see bears, I get to see snakes, I get to see this vibrant collection of animals. But one of the things I've fallen in love with the most is talking about the history. That has never been my comfort level. That has never been my background. But I find it's impossible to talk about the parks without talking about the people. And here at Shenandoah, there are so many aspects of our human history dating not just to the CCC, not just to the mountain communities, but even back to the Native Americans. And there's so much you can focus on, and being able to share those stories really is what I've fallen in love with the most.
What's your favorite thing to do at the park?
Hiking. My wife and I are big hikers. We actually just celebrated her 30th birthday, and now she's the crazy one. I just went along for the ride. She wanted to hike 30 miles for her 30th. So we pieced together a 30-mile day hike and went out and did it. So definitely here in the park, there's a lot of hiking to do, and that's where you'll find me just about every weekend.
What park have you yet to visit but is on your bucket list and why?
Glacier National Park in northern Montana. I'm told it's incredible. Looking at photos, that is some big wilderness, massive peaks, big glaciers, and a lot of grizzly bears. And I'm a sucker for bears.
And when you go to a park, what are 3 must-haves that you pack?
Three must have. So I always bring extra water, depending on the hike I'm doing, whether it's just twice the amount that I think I should need or an actual water filter to fill out of streams. I pack a map. Usually I'll pick up a big fold out topography map of the park or any of those handouts that I could get at the visitor center, and I'll know my route. And I always leave, maybe this is a cop out, but I always leave with a plan. And with that, what I mean by that is I let somebody else know. My wife and I will usually text one of our nearby friends or coworkers or even our families back home, and we'll say, expect us off trail at this time or expect to hear back from us by this time. And if you don't hear from me in this buffer, try reaching out, and then we might need to need to get a search party. But
That's
so
so
those are kind of
important.
my three things. I always make sure, oh, and if I could add on a fourth, a good
Sure.
appetite.
What is your favorite campfire activity?
Campfire activity. Well, speaking of good appetite, I would say growing up, we always made. Have you ever heard of a pie iron pizza?
No.
So a pie iron is going to be a little cast iron, you know, rectangle on the end of these two poles, and you put sandwich bread in there, some pizza sauce, cheese, any pizza topping you could dream of. Heck, you could even use, cherry pie filling if you want to make a dessert pie iron. Put that over the campfire, roast it for a few minutes. It'll come out nice and crispy brown, and you have yourself a pizza sandwich.
Okay,
It
I'm
is
also gonna put that recipe in the notes to this
incredible.
episode.
Incredible.
Tent, camper, or cabin?
Tent. We're big into backpacking. We have a little two-person tent that we'll take with us, but anytime we're front country camping, we have a slightly larger one that we'll be in, but we love being in the tent.
Hiking with or without trekking poles?
I hike without, but I strongly encourage anybody with risky knees to take some trekking poles, but I go without.
What is your favorite trail snack?
Dried mangoes.
Ooh. What is the best animal sighting you've seen?
This is tough because it varies based on park.
Okay, you can
So
give me one for each.
so I would say here at Shenandoah, I love seeing the bobcats. We have a lot of bobcats in the park, but we describe them as ghosts of the forest because you don't see them unless they let you. But down in the South District, where it's a little bit quieter, fewer people typically on average driving that part of the drive. If you're there just right in the evening, you'll have one pass in front of your car, and I love seeing them. Now, a fun story, maybe not fun at the time, but one of my favorite stories going back out west was we were hiking. This was while working out at Yellowstone, and we did a little bit of bushwhacking because my wife saw something shiny in the distance. She's practically a raven. But what we found was actually interesting. It was a little cache of scientific equipment. Our fisheries team had been doing some stream sampling and left some of their equipment there for the time being. And as we were making our way back onto the trail, we're kind of scrambling over all of these fallen logs. There had been a forest fire in years past, so a lot of fallen debris that we were climbing over. And just before we were getting back to the trail, my wife missteps off of one of those logs and twists her ankle. So she, falls to the ground. She's crying out. As I said, she was caterwauling. She doesn't like when I tell this story, but she's yelling out in pain. Me and our friends, we run over. My friends are checking on her, and I see this big brown hump just about 10 feet away on the other side of the trees. And I'm like, okay, honey, I know you're in pain, but there is something big just around the bend. And so we all quiet down. Few moments later, the biggest bull moose I had ever seen steps out, turns his head towards this full bullwinkle, and maybe 15 feet away, way too close for comfort. But he was just confused at this small creature caterwauling on the ground. And then he makes his way down the trail, grazing as he went, and we watched him for probably half an hour. That was probably my favorite wildlife experience ever.
I have been all over and I have yet to see a moose and I long for it. That's an awesome story.
They are few and far between, but incredible to see when you do.
Yeah. And what is your favorite sound in a park?
I love rushing water. And one of my favorite things, most of the hikes that I find myself going out on here in Shenandoah, we have approximately 90 different streams flowing off of the mountain itself. These are going to be feeding either into the Shenandoah River to the west or the James and Rappahannock to the east. So a lot of water activity, a lot of waterfalls, as you mentioned during your facts at the beginning. So it is hard to get out of earshot of rushing water, and that is where I'm at my most peaceful.
I love it. Carl, thank you so much for sharing your love of the parks with us.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for letting me share.
And thanks for listening. Until next time, see you in the parks. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like and share on your favorite podcast platform. Music for the Parks podcast is written, performed, and produced by Porter Hardy. For more information, please follow us on Instagram at The Parks Podcast or visit our website at theparkspodcast.com.